Ladies and gentlemen, it has been 7 months since I've updated my complete tier list for open field PvP in Rise of Kingdoms, and that changes today. We've gotten so many new commanders over the past 7 months. Some are spectacular and some are not so much, and in the meanwhile lots of older commanders have gotten even more irrelevant over the past 7 months. So today it is time. This tier list is outdated. Let's go ahead and update it, not only with updating how some of the older commanders are ranked here in this tier list, but also adding some of our new faces here that we've gotten over the past 7 months to the tier list, so you guys can see what my thoughts and opinions are and where my head is kind of at with the current meta in Rise of Kingdoms. But first, what's going on, guys? Cheers. Now really quick, you guys probably didn't know this, but about 69% of you guys watching this video are not subscribed. If you appreciate updated tier list videos for Rise of Kingdoms, consider subscribing and double check, because you might think you're subbed because you see all these videos but you're actually not. Also, quick plug for my mega well mug. I almost never talk about the fact that I have custom mugs that are down below. They ship to tons of different countries around the world and they're available in different sizes and designs. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's jump into the tier list here, and let me just give you guys a quick rundown as to how I'm looking at the different tiers on this list. Okay, first of all, like I said before, this tier list is for open field PvP. This is not for rally or for garrison or anything like that. This is strictly for fighting other players in the open field. And the way that I'm looking at this is that the S plus tier commanders are sort of must-have commanders that I think are going to be meta viable for at least the next year or two. They are the cream of the crop, and these are all the commanders that I think everyone watching this video should have at this point. If you don't, you should be thinking about how you can incorporate them into your lineup moving forward, while also keeping in mind what the next sort of commander releases are probably going to be, either cavalry or ranged or leadership. Next, we have S tier commanders, and these are commanders that I think perform almost as well, if not like as good as the S plus commanders in some scenarios, but these are more so secondary commanders or commanders that you're going to use in a second army of a given troop type. A tier commanders are getting to be a little bit older here in Rise of Kingdoms, but you might sprinkle them in if you're running maybe a third march of a particular troop type, or if you just need to fill in a slot that is empty in your army, you want to run another army and you don't have anything else, so you dust off your old Alex or you dust off your old Med, for example. B tier is a subpar commander. These are commanders that you probably shouldn't be using in Rise of Kingdoms. They're definitely pretty old and outdated at this point, but maybe they have some niche uses, possibly like Pakal, for example. And then finally we have C, D, and F tier. C and D tier you really should not be using. There might be maybe one niche role for these commanders, maybe, like for example Richard's expertise really slows things down pretty heavily, or for example Julius Caesar has an insane museum relic, but really you shouldn't be using these. D tier commanders are absolute no-go, and F tier commanders are bottom of the barrel. Like, these are the worst commanders that you can be using in the open field. But really, if you're watching this video and you're a free-to-play player or a low spender, I would only really invest in the S plus tier commanders and maybe one or two commanders in the S tier. Beyond that, just save your sculptures, wait for the next must-have commander. If you're a low to medium spender, then you can kind of venture off into the top 2 rows, and if you're a medium high or Kraken, then you're going to go in the top 3 rows to fill out your 7 army lineup. Okay, with all of the definitions out of the way, let me just be clear once again. This is the old tier list from 7 months ago, and my mind has definitely changed on some of these commanders. Okay, first of all, I'm gonna move commanders like Jan Zizka and Hannibal Barca out of the F tier, strictly out of respect, because I do think that, like, technically these commanders are slightly better in the field than everything else here, but again, this is very nuanced. You shouldn't be using these in the field anyway. I just feel like it's not fair to compare Jan Zizka in the open field with, you know, a commander like I don't know, Sunduk, right? So kind of just wanted to make that distinction here. Also, these 3 epic commanders, I'm only distinguishing them from the pack because they technically can be used in the open field in like KVK1, and Joan of Arc and Imhotep have some sort of minor utility in the field. You definitely shouldn't be doing it in Season of Conquest, but like, I think technically, you know, I think they're technically better than the other epics, so I wanted to distinguish that here. but again, you know, I would be more likely to run YSS in the field probably than anything here, but again, this is all nuanced. Moving on to the C tier, are any of these commanders going to move up or down on the tier list? I think the answer is no. I think that these commanders do belong in the C tier. I don't think they're as bad as the commanders in D and F, but they certainly are not commanders that you want to use in the open field. Like really, they're just not, you don't want to use them. Getting good trades with these commanders is really a rich flex, to be honest with you guys. They're just not very good. Moving on to the B tier, this is where we're going to start to see some changes on the tier list. First of all, let's start with the commanders that are getting demoted. Okay, commanders that are going to be demoted here include Ethelfled and Leonidas. I think these two commanders are the least impressive of this group, and really I think some of these commanders they're only staying in B tier because they're technically better than the things in the tiers below them, but they are quite bad, and those include commanders such as Chandragupta. We have Gilgamesh, for example. These commanders just don't really hold their own in the field anymore. We still see the occasional Pakal Herald, which is why they're still in this tier. Definitely outdated. I wouldn't cheeseburger with this anymore, but some people still do it. Some of these commanders like Thutmose really are hanging on by a thread in this category based on their relic alone. Same thing with commanders like Martel and also Pyrrhus, and Tamiris. Really, she should definitely be a bit lower on this list because now we've got other newer archers in the game that definitely outclass her, although she still technically can be used in a very competitive 7 army lineup for archers, so I will leave her here. Next, we have to talk about commanders that are getting upgraded from the B tier, and these include first of all, I know the siege mains are they've been very patient this entire video. Okay, they've been very patient. I did not give the new siege credit when they came out, and that I was wrong. Cordoba goes in S tier. He goes in S tier. Objectively, he is, honestly, I think if it weren't for Cordoba, I feel like 50% of the people that have invested in Siege in the past year would not have done so. I think he himself kind of carries Siege in my opinion, but nonetheless you still have to have commanders to pair him with. I'm going to put Gajamada here in the A tier, and I'm also going to put Margaret in the A tier for that same reason. Now I know the A tier is looking very stacked right now. That will change in just a minute. Bobber is going to stay in B tier. I think he's kind of like, he's just the weird uncle that people use because you need another Siege commander, and I think he's definitely the first to go when Siege get a new release, which could be very soon. Hey guys, it's Omniarch from the future, and the video that you're watching right now was actually recorded before they revealed the new ranged commanders coming to the game. And so while I had poor things to say about Bobber in this video, it's worth noting that moving forward he may actually play a bigger role in the open field meta than we previously thought. But I'm going to keep this video the way it is because this video is how I see the meta today, not how I expect the meta to change when these new commanders come into the game. But that is that. We're going to leave that as it is. I will bump Tamiris up here a little bit because technically I think she is probably still the most used in this lineup, but that is going to do it. Next, we have to move on to the A tier, and here's where we have to start to demote some commanders to the B tier because they just don't hold up. They can't really hang with the rest of A tier, and that unfortunately includes commanders such as Cyrus. I think Cyrus has definitely not aged very well at all. I'm not going to really go through and like rank this, you know, rank the B tier, so unless I say otherwise, just assume this is kind of random. I also think unfortunately Saladin has to get bumped down to B tier. His relic hasn't really saved him, unfortunately, from becoming a little bit more obscure. Same thing with Chook. Chook is definitely more obscure now. Ramses did just get a new relic, and unfortunately that did not really help him. We also have to bump down commanders such as Sargon, definitely coming back down to B tier. Sargon is a tragedy. Basically, he's a tragedy, so we're going to move him down, and we're also going to bump down Takeda. Now the thing with Takeda is that he is fine with Attila, but besides that you don't really see anybody running Takeda in the open field, right? Like he's not really a thing standalone, right? So that's kind of how I'm looking at it. I think originally I put him in A tier strictly because of Attila, but I think objectively he's less used than Attila, and he's not really used frankly at all without him. So yeah, we're gonna throw him in B tier, and I think that is going to round out the B tier. Now some of these commanders are definitely better than others in the B tier. Make no mistake, these commanders are not very good. Okay, let's put Babur there just so I don't get roasted in the comments. But yeah, like some of these commanders are, you know, okay, but you're not going to use them. Okay, you're just not going to use them, unfortunately. So that is that. Moving on to the A tier, I think that this tier is pretty fairly stacked. I don't think any of these commanders deserve to move up or down. The only ones that I'll say, Gaja Mata definitely comes very close to the top here with Margaret. You see these two as primaries all the time for the ranged marches, and they kind of unlock the potential of Cordoba in different ways. So I'm going to put them near the top of A tier. I do think that Alex is still better than them as far as like holding their own weight. Again, I think that these two commanders, you know, they kind of are so popular because of Cordoba. That's kind of how I'm viewing this, right? So as soon as Cordoba has a better pairing, I don't think, like, I could be wrong here, but I'm not sure that they're going to be used as much. So that's kind of how I'm looking at that. You could make the same argument about Alex with Liu Che, for example, though. So I think these three belong in the top here. I'm going to move Nebu up a bit because I actually think Nebu is one of the strongest here. I'm also going to move Mehmed up a bit as well. We're going to move Trajan. Actually, Trajan stays there, and the rest of this lineup looks pretty much how I would expect it to be. Moving on to the S tier. Some of these commanders gotta come down. Okay, they gotta come down, and we're looking at, unfortunately, Boudica Prime coming down to A tier. Justinian definitely coming down to A tier. I'm gonna drop him like probably here. Probably right about there is a good A tier placement for Justinian. Solid beat stick, but nothing fancy here, and we've got better options now, and also we are on the brink of new calves as well, so that will further push him out of the open field meta. Remember, this is open field PvP meta, and that is pretty much that. The S tier, you know, man, I'm really, you know what? Okay, first of all, Boudica actually has fallen farther in my mind than I really initially thought, so she's going to come down here. I still think Alex is the best in the A tier right now. Who knows how that will change, but I do think his relic has helped him quite a bit. I'm struggling with William. I want to move him down, but I don't think I can. Man, a matter of fact, I'm gonna move Mehmed up a little bit. I'm gonna move Mehmed up here, because Mehmed actually, ironically, I've been testing him out in my current KVK just a little bit. I've been dabbling with him in the open field. I know, crazy, just because I've been so frustrated with my calves, and I don't want to necessarily invest in Belisarius Prime because I feel like calves are so close to coming out, like the next generation. Mehmed actually in the field, if you have his double relic behind a Huo, actually hits really hard. I've had instances where it performs better than many of my other marches in the field. I don't think I've used it enough to say definitively, but I think if you were to make the case of using Huo Mehmed in the open field, I would say it's fine. You can definitely do that. So I'm actually rather impressed with Mehmed if you have his relic. Also, mine's expertise, so he has a slightly higher damage factor. But anyway, yeah, I don't think I can move down William, but I do have to slide Guan down here a little bit, and also I am going to bump down Gorgo. I'm gonna put Gorgo right here. Gorgo is, again, she's good in the field, but again, just like Tarek, just like Justinian, these are like beat sticks, right? She's missing a skill in the field, and I mean, again, it's not that she's bad here, but I mean, it just is what it is. We've got better options now, and so I have to be objective here. You're probably not going to use her in a 2-army lineup for your infantry, and maybe not even a 3-army lineup, possibly. I am going to keep Guan Yu in the S tier because I have used him in this KVK and he's been fine, but he's definitely performed a little bit worse than previous KVKs, and this is the first time that I have experienced Guan Yu performing slightly worse in my entire time playing Rise of Kingdoms. It might be because we're fighting really strong opponents in our first zone. They've got really great field presence during their uptime, so maybe that's why my Guan is struggling a little bit, but I do think he belongs in S tier. I think his 3-second silence for field fights is insane. People are writing that off like crazy. His relic is okay. 3 target 2000 damage factor AoE. I think he is hanging on to S tier by a thread, just like William, but I do think that they're still fine to run in the field. They're not S plus, but I think they are objectively better than some of these commanders here, but worse than Cordoba for sure. Next, we have to talk about the S plus tier before we go ahead and add the new commanders to this tier list. And honestly, I'm struggling here a little bit, because if you wanted to argue that all these commanders stay in S plus tier, meaning that they are part of the best armies in Rise of Kingdoms in the field, I would agree with you. I think that's a completely logical thing to say. However, I do feel like I'm being forced here to move some commanders around a little bit. And truthfully, if you wanted to look at each of these commanders objectively and say, does this commander belong in the single best army of their respective troop type? If the answer is no, then maybe they don't belong in S plus. Okay, so if we think about the best possible armies for infantry right now, you're either going to argue that it is William Wallace with Liu Che, or you're going to argue that it is CPO Prime with Liu Che, or you're going to argue that it might be something along the lines of Liu Che Alex, or possibly the new Ragnar Prime with Liu Che. But no matter what you're doing, all of those armies contain Liu Che, and therefore he remains an S plus. Same thing with Zhuge Liang. We think about what is the single best Archer March right now. It's going to be Zhuge Liang with somebody, right? Most likely it's going to be Hermann Prime. I think that is an undisputed pair, and therefore Hermann Prime also lands himself in S plus. CPO Prime, I think you can also make the case for, again, running CPO Prime with Liu Che, still arguably one of the best, if not the best infantry march in the game right now. That doubled AoE is just insane. The debuff on the active skill from CPO is still insane. It's 30% health, guys. Truly incredible. Great stats, great march speed. So much to love about CPO Prime. If we think about Huo, I think if we're talking about the single best, like if you're only running one cavalry army, I think the best cavalry army right now is Huo Joan. I do. I know that Nevsky diehard fans are like raging right now, but I do think that if you're only running one cavalry march, I think from my experience in my current KVK and my last two KVKs, my last two KVKs, consistently my Huo Joan has slightly outperformed my Nevsky Joan. And that's just my anecdotal experience, and from talking to many other players that I play with, they also feel that way. And I think if we're comparing Huo to Nevsky, you've got double the attack stat on Huo compared to Nevsky, right? He has 40%, Nevsky has 20%. You look at the defense, he's got 20%, he's got 35% win expertise, so nearly double the defense as well. And on top of all that, he has 400 extra damage factor on the active skill. And so, really the only things that keep Nevsky competitive are that he's got some health, which is great. He also has the fourth skill, gives him a ton of bonus skill damage for Joan, and his debuff on his active skill is quite nice. 45% defense reduction to one target is good. However, it is only to one target. And if we look at the debuffs on other commanders here, like Zhuge Liang and like CPO Prime and like Hermann Prime, these debuffs are AoE debuffs, right? So I think that Nevsky finally finds his way in S tier for me. Again, if you want to argue that he belongs here above Huo strictly because of the debuff in fourth skill, go for it. You can do that. I think that's fair. But if we're just talking about the single best just one best cavalry march, I think it's Huo Joan. That's been my experience. I think lots of players have experienced that as well. And that's not to take away from how good Nevsky is, but I gotta call it how I see it. Okay, that's how I see it right now. And I think it's fair to move one of those commanders down, because at the end of the day, you can't have all three of these commanders in the single best cavalry army. Okay, so in your mind, if you think Huo belongs here, I can see your argument there for sure. In your mind, if you think Joan goes down here, I don't really think I can see that, honestly. I feel like she kind of deals so much of the damage of these armies. But regardless, I'm moving Nevsky down here. I think you could make the strongest argument for Nevsky being a tier lower. Not that he individually is much worse, but it just is what it is. Okay, it is what it is. That's how I'm looking at it. Okay, finally, we have to get to the new commanders here for Rise of Kingdoms. And let's start with our boy Belisarius Prime. He got a lot of hate for when he first came into the game, and I think the hate was mostly justified, but he does turn out to be okay. He can hold his own in the field, and I think if you were going to put him in a 2 army lineup for cavalry, you could possibly make that argument with replacing your William. And for that reason, I do think that he belongs in the S tier. I'm going to drop him at the back of S tier. I think that a lot of players might not have expected that. I think a lot of players may expect him to be lower on this tier list because of how negative people have been about him, but I think his expertise kind of saves him. If it weren't for his expertise, he absolutely would be in A tier, but I think his expertise kind of saves him here and he lands himself in S. Next we have Eleanor, and she is not a commander that you're going to use in the field. She's just not. For that reason, she's going to land herself in C tier. Again, remember that this is an open field tier list, and if you look at her skills, literally every single skill except for the active skill has a component that requires she be in a garrison, right? And without those extra components, she has 20% attack, 15% defense, and like a, what is it, 2300 active, 2300 active skill damage, and a 10% debuff on that active skill to one target. So like in the field, she just can't hang. I'm sorry, she can't hang. She goes in C tier. Next is our boy Scipio Emilianus. So this is the new rally commander for infantry, and he does actually hit like a truck. His active skill is very, very strong. However, he doesn't really have any stats as an open field commander, and so I've seen people use him. I think it is possible to use him. I am going to put him in the A tier. I will put him right about here. You can make the argument with Trajan. I don't really know. I don't see that many Trajans anymore, but I've seen people use him in the field. Despite not having stats, he does still hit hard as a smite damage commander, but I mean, I think his placement in A tier is very temporary. I think he will probably move down. You can use him in the field, but you probably shouldn't, so we're going to leave him in A tier. He's definitely better, I would say, than some of the commanders in B tier. That's just my opinion here, and if you wanted to put him in B tier, like high B tier, I think you can make that argument as well. Next up is William Wallace, and William Wallace is a very interesting commander. I think that a lot of players compare him to Alexander the Great, rightfully so. For full transparency, I recently made a video talking about my best armies in Rise of Kingdoms, and I said that I would give William a second shot in my current KVK, and he has landed himself back on the bench. He just doesn't perform as consistently as Alexander the Great. I don't know what it is. I know the Krakens are getting great use out of William. I can't seem to replicate that. I don't know if it's because I don't have talented everything. I don't know if this is something that just like he shines when you have perfect gear, perfect armaments, perfect everything. Again, I'm not trying to say that William's a bad commander, and in fact, if you are a brand new player and you're asking me, should I get William or should I get Alex, I would probably steer you towards William, because I think his talent tree makes him more unique. He'll probably age a little bit better because of that talent tree, and also he performs about the same as Alex, if I'm being honest, without needing to spend any of your museum relic or exhibit coins like you do for Alex. You can't use Alex without his museum relic, in my opinion. So yeah, I would say him and Alex very, very neck and neck in my mind. I think personally, and again, this is 2 KVKs in a row, my Alex has outperformed slightly, and so I continue to go back to the Liu Che Alex combo, and because of that, William Wallace does not land himself in S+ tier, but he does land himself in S tier. Now you might be saying, okay, Omniarch, you're telling me that Liu Che Alex is better than William Wallace Liu Che, yet you're putting William Wallace above Alex. Why is that? Well, like I said before, I think that they are relatively comparable commanders in my mind with their current application. However, I think William Wallace can be flexed to be used for other commanders now and in the future, whereas Alexander the Great does not really have that privilege, right? I think the beauty with Alexander the Great with Liu Che is that Liu Che's expertise pops the instant proc damage for Alex a lot more often, and because of that, the synergy there is just serendipitous. Okay, it's just a beautiful thing. The synergy is nice. I love it. It works flawlessly. You just go in and out of battle. You don't have to think about it. You just get those active skills, or I guess those instant proc skills, and it just works. But without the expertise on Liu Che, the Alex pairing, Alex would probably, well, I guess he would probably stay in A tier because of his relic, and I think he is just better than some of these commanders here, especially with that march speed for infantry. But I think, again, William Wallace is more versatile. You can use him with more things. You can use him as a primary commander, which you cannot really do with Alex because he's just so old. People see him and they assume that you're free to play. They assume that you're an old player, you're a bad player, whatever. So William Wallace is comparable to Alex with Liu Che, but he's more versatile. He has this my talent tree, and I think he will probably pair better moving forward with newer infantry than Alex, who is basically completely reliant on the expertise for Liu Che, in my opinion, so, and his museum relic. So that's why I think William Wallace lands himself in S tier. and I think he lands himself honestly probably at the top of S tier. I think him and Nevsky, you can argue about these two honestly. I'm going to put William Wallace up top here because I'm bullish on William Wallace, but I'm just not fully there yet. I have him fully expertised. You know, maybe he'll have an even better pair coming down the pipeline with the next infantry release if it's smite damage, but that's my thoughts on our good friend William Wallace. Moving on to Choi Young. This is a devastating new garrison commander. However, in the field, it seems like even though he's got a 5 target AoE, he just deals damage relatively slow, and he heals so much that you might be able to get a good trade out of him if you're dealing enough damage. But the problem is you deal damage relatively slowly, it seems, and that's kind of been the biggest complaint that I've seen from archer mains. It's not that he's not usable in the field, it's just that you have better options in the field. And so does he belong in B tier with some of these other commanders? No, I think he belongs in A tier, and I would probably put him like here. Maybe you could argue something like this or something like that. It's really hard to say, but yeah, I think he's just usable. But I mean, you gotta go all in on like the circle formation, right? Like there's just so much that is working against him, unfortunately. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. I think he's a mediocre A tier commander in the field. Great garrison, but unfortunately it doesn't translate to open field fighting. Next we have Shajar. Just like Choi Young, she has the mighty healing, which makes her a little bit, you know, it typically will work against her favor in terms of trades in the field. However, unlike Choi Young, she has the skill tree, and her active skill is worded in such a way that if she is primary, she hits like an absolute truck. And I think that and that alone, combined with the fact that she has a ton of extra health, puts her in S tier. I think that she belongs at the back of S tier. She is the closest to falling off here. Maybe you could argue Guan Yu or William, but I think if you use her as a primary and you put, for example, YSG behind her, I think you can get pretty good trades with her. It's not ideal because you could just do something like an expertise Ashurbanipal, but I've mentioned this in previous videos. Under the assumption that you can't get Ashurbanipal for whatever reason, for Mightiest Governor reasons, then you can get Shajar and she'll be almost as good. Depending on the conditions of the field, you actually might perform a little bit better because she really just hits one target really hard compared to Ashurbanipal, but he still hits pretty hard too. So yeah, he gets favor because of his AoE, but regardless, I think she's fine in S tier. And then finally we have Ragnar Prime, and I think maybe many of you guys might be curious, maybe this is the whole reason you clicked on this video, was for Ragnar Prime. And I think that if we compare him to other commanders that we look at that are at the top of the meta, right, he is obviously, you know, basically fighting for Guan's spot, right? He is a tankier version than Guan. He is a, you know, he has a higher damage factor than Guan. Objectively, he has an interesting, you know, sort of vampire debuff effect going on there. So, you know, he definitely is at least on the same par as Guan Yu. But when you look at him compared to CPO, right, he's the other AoE infantry skill damage commander. You think, okay, well, the damage factor is definitely higher for Ragnar, but he doesn't have the 30% health reduction, which is insane on CPO, and he has on his own kit less march speed, even though you can steal it from the enemy. I think he's probably a little bit more tanky than CPO because of his fourth skill removes or takes less skill damage and things like that, and he has so much defense, it's insane. So with that being said, I do think that he hits harder than everything else in S tier, so he lands in S plus tier, and truthfully I think he belongs right here. I think that is where he belongs. I think you probably can do this. That would be a little bit more fair. I think Harman Prime is quite good. His poison stacks are basically invaluable. As we get more and more skill damage commanders in the game, like the poison just stays relevant, right? It's just relevant forever. And so we have a new entrant to the S plus tier. We have Ragnar Prime. And again, if we use the logic of, does this commander find himself in the single best infantry army in the game? I think you could make that argument. I think he is the least likely to find himself in the best army, in the single best army of everyone in the S plus tier. However, I do think he's a better commander than Huo objectively. He just deals so much damage, it's insane. I don't even have mine max and I've been using him in the field and he's been popping off. Like he instantly just works with CPO, like it's beautiful synergy. So yeah, I think he's better than Joan of Arc Prime as well. So I think really the main thing here is that infantry just have so many good commanders right now that like the reason that he's not instantly in the single best infantry army isn't because he's bad, it's because infantry is so good right now that they have so many different options. So if you used him with Liu Che or you used him with CPO Prime, I think you could argue that they're one of the best open field marches in the game, even if he isn't necessarily in the single best infantry army in the game. So that's what I think about Ragnar Prime. I really tried to think about, am I biased here? Am I just biased for Ragnar Prime? But literally everyone I talk to in my KVK, like, he just works in the field with CPO. He just pops off. Like, I don't know what to say. Like, he just is an incredible commander. He's got one of the highest AoE skill damages in the game, if not the single highest skill damage in the game right now. So yeah, I don't know. I can't wait to see what people do with him. Honestly, I feel like, you know, in KVKs where you can change troop types, if you made YSG a infantry commander and you slapped him behind Ragnar, like, I don't know, dude, like that 60, what is it, 62% extra skill damage on YSG is just gonna make Ragnar Prime hit like an absolute truck. Or you can make Ragnar Prime a cavalry commander and put him behind Huo, and now you've got an absolute dominant cavalry march in the field. So there's a lot you can do with Ragnar, especially in his own KVK. You could use him anywhere, which is incredible. So like, he's just so good, right? He's just so good. He belongs in S+. I don't think anyone can really argue that. He's just one of the best commanders in the game right now. Unfortunately though, the other commanders up here are either you know, stronger, or they have more unique effects, or they have more unique debuffs, something like that. But this is it. I think Ragnar Prime is S+. Guys, with that being said, this video was a little bit longer than I thought it would be. So if you made it all the way to the end of the video and you found it useful or informative or entertaining, drop a thumbs up on it. It really helps out the channel a ton. It helps get this video out into the YouTube algorithm so other Rise of Kingdoms players might see it. And while you're down there, consider subscribing to the channel and clicking the bell to be notified the next time I upload a Rise of Kingdoms video. We are so close to 80,000 subscribers, so consider dropping a sub down below. You might think you're subbed, just double check, you might not be. And while you're down there, put in the comment section below what you think about my current tier list for Rise of Kingdoms. I will turn off my camera for a second here if you want to take a screenshot of the complete tier list in the game. That is my current opinion on where things stand. Again, some of these commanders in the middle, you can shuffle them around. This isn't a perfect order, but I do think that they are approximately rated correctly. Maybe I was a little mean to Bobber. Maybe we could put him like up here or something. Okay, we'll put Bobber up there. And you know what? Let's move Tamiris up here as well. I think that's fair too. Okay, that's it. I'm gonna stand by this one. That's how it's gonna go. Okay. Anyway, I'm done rambling. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I will talk to you guys again soon. Peace.